Welcome back to KPFK Los Angeles 90.7 FM. This is Travel Tips for Aztlan, and I'm your host, Mark Torres. I'm here with my special guest host, Nancy Sanchez. How are you?
Hi, Mark Torres. I am doing very good.
This is week 9 of our quarantine edition of Travel Tips for Aztlan. We are recording this live in the Dojo of Peace, Tranquility, and Happiness, otherwise known as Nancy's Kitchen.
That's right.
And we're very happy to welcome our very special guest for this show, Dan Guerrero, who's the son of Chicano legend Lalo Guerrero, and he also is a wonderful entertainer and has a brand new full-length entertainment piece out called Gaytino that he's been cultivating for years, and we're going to hear about that. But first, we want to welcome you to KPFK. Welcome, Dan.
How are you? How are you? I'm happy to see you both.
All right. Well, we're going to start off with a few questions about your dad, Lalo Guerrero, because there's a lot of our audience members that doesn't really know our history, whether it's music, culture, where Chicano comes from, and your dad plays a big part. Nancy has our first question.
Yes, and I think it also is generational. So I would like to ask, can you tell us a little bit about your dad, his beginnings and his influences as a musician, and growing up, what were his influences and what influenced him to create the way he did?
Yeah, well, that's the whole hour right there. You don't have to say another thing, for God's sake. Wow. Well, hold on. Let me do my nails here. That's a lot of questions. That's not a question. That's like a life story.
Listen, I've been working on my questions, okay? Because Mark Torres says I have to be more intricate.
Yeah, but yeah, that question was 20 minutes long. My God. All right. So in a nutshell, Dad was born in Tucson, Arizona. So he is that first generation of Chicanos, really. That first generation. He was born in Tucson in 1916. And my grandparents had come up, big surprise, from Mexico during the Mexican Revolution. But they didn't come across, like, oh yeah, come on. My grandfather, Eduardo, was a boilermaker for the railroad. And the Southern Pacific Railroad went to Mexico to bring back skilled labor. He was an expert boilermaker. So they came during the revolution, or shortly thereafter, I would assume. And so all the kids, all of them were born in Tucson. So that was that first generation for us of Chicanada. That was happening in lots of places, but that was my dad's particular story. And interesting, my dad says he remembers when he was little, his mother always saying, "Yo soy Chicana, yo soy Chicana." So it's not, I'm not a scholar. I don't know the real genesis of the word, but it's not like it was invented, during the Chicano moratorium. He remembers her saying that she was a Chicana and she was Mexican born, So he was born in Tucson, 1916, and that's where he grew up. And, by the time he was 8 or 9, his mother had taught him the guitar. So that was his only music teacher ever. He made an entire career out of composing music and lyrics. And I mean, a whole career, did not read music. He would write the song on his guitar, and he'd run over to his arrangers and he'd play it, and then the arranger would write it up, So he was really that first generation of Chicanada, really. So anyway, what else you want to know about?
But your grandmother played guitar.
Oh, yeah, my Nana. She played beautifully and sang beautifully. Probably in another era, she might have had a career, but there was no way a woman, only, bad girls, would do that. Except for Chavela Vargas, who didn't give a shit. Good for her. She was an amazing woman. I knew them both. I lost my grandparents when I was, I guess, in my 20s. So I was born in Tucson, but I grew up in LA because by that time, by the time I was like 2, my dad decided that Tucson, that he loved more than anything. And my mother, Margaret, who was also born and raised in Tucson, Mexican mother, Irish American father. And so they moved to LA when I was like a year and a half. So I never lived there, but I have a great love for Tucson because that's our roots. And I grew up going there to see family. And, you know, I love my Tucson. Yeah.
Now,
Wow.
what's the deal with Arizona being so popular with these legendary families like the Guerreros and the Ronstadts?
Well, Linda's father and my father were good friends. Of course, at that time, there were only 20 people in Tucson, so that wasn't hard to do, I guess, but they were good friends. And Linda swears, and I believe it's true, knowing her, she's a brilliant woman. She remembers my dad serenading her with La Burrita when she was still in diapers.
Oh, wow.
And knowing her, I totally believe that. She's the most brilliant woman on the planet. I love her. So yeah, so Dad and Gilbert and Dad were good friends. But Linda and I never met until like during the Paul Rodriguez show. She guessed it on the Paul. That's the first time we met, even though our dads had this long ago connection.
All right, our special guest is Dan Guerrero right here on KPFK Los Angeles, 90.7 FM. Okay, so your dad relocates the family to Los Angeles. Tell us about the evolution of his getting involved with the Pachuco scene and the $1 Million Theater.
Well, it actually started a little earlier than that because even though he was still living in Tucson, he would come to LA to work, and he used to sing Overa Street at the Golondrina. So he sang with, it was a duet, Lupe Fernandez. And they were a duet, and then he'd go back to Tucson. So he was going back and forth during the 30s quite a bit. And so at some point, and I'm not quite sure how, but he wound up being signed by Imperial Records, and they formed the Trio Imperial. And it was my dad and two others. And so they started recording, and that's where really he first started some of the Pachuco songs that he later did as a soloist. So they did quite a few, I think, like Pachuquita on Imperial Records, and then they wanted him to go solo, and he didn't want to. He wanted to stay with his trio. And my mother was very strongly Irish Mexican. You can imagine how strong my mother was, Margaret Marmion. And she said, no, you can do it, you can do it. He always said there would be no Lalo Guerrero without my mom, who just, you know, most women would have said, no, get a job, you're not gonna be, and she knew he had to have his music. So anyway, she talked him into it, and then he went solo. And his first solo recorder was La Pecadora, Pecadora, I should say, Agustin Lara's song. And from there, so that's when he left the trio and he became a solo artist. And then he started to record all the Pachuco songs that you all know mostly from Zoot Suit. That was into the 40s. But he had already done a few with the Trio Imperial in the 30s.
All right, our guest is Dan Guerrero. He is the son of legend Lalo Guerrero, and he is an artist in his own right. We are going to be talking about his production, Gaytino, a little bit later in our conversation, but we still have to flush out a few things here. Can you describe what the street life was back in the 40s when your dad is getting those bands together, the hits, the dance halls that are happening, $1 Million Theater, swing is catching on, Pachuco Boogie is catching on, and your dad's a central part of that movement?
It actually even was a little prior to the 40s, you know, because for a few years we lived in San Diego during the war. During the war years, we lived in San Diego when I was maybe 3, 4, 5 years old. We moved back to LA, to Mariana in East LA when I was 5, I think. And so he was already, he kind of left career for a little bit and actually worked for, I think it was Ryan Aircraft. And my dad, who knew how to do, he couldn't do anything except play the guitar and sing, which is not a bad thing, by the way, as it turns out. But there he was working on aircraft. God knows, I'm hoping there were never terrible accidents. But so when we come back from San Diego, when I'm about 5, that's where Dad really gets into his music. But he had already said that even in the 30s, you know, and every other store or whatever doorway in downtown LA was a cantina. And not just Mexican music. There was black, and there was, Mexican, and there was jazz. And he said it was unbelievable. Every other door was a bar with music in it, And so it was a fantastic time, really, for that. And I'll tell you a big influence he had, actually, because he grew up in Tucson. And he had his Los Carlistas. He was part of a quartet called Los Carlistas. After King Carlos of Spain. They had a whole big social club in Tucson called Los Carlistas, and 4 of his friends started this quartet. And so back in Tucson during the Depression, so this was very highly influential in his life as a musician, they moved to Mexico. My grandfather had a brother, and he said, hey, it's better down here than it is there. So they all went. My dad's like a teenager. And of course, all the kids, they were Americans. They're not Mexicans. They're Americans of Mexican descent. Nobody uses that word anymore, huh? Descent. And so off they went to Mexico City. My dad is maybe 17. And he's not at all happy. None of them are. But what it did, it exposed him to the huge breadth of Mexican music. Because before, TV and barely radio, really, we're talking 17, he was born in 1916, there was only border music. So in Tucson, you knew mariachis, and you knew maybe, just the basic. And down there, he was exposed to Agustin Lara. He was exposed to all that music. And so he came back, as he says in the documentary I did on him, the original Chicano. He said he came back armed. He came back armed with all this new music that influenced him and his writing. And so that, I think, is when he started to know that he had to leave Tucson, which was, much as he loved it, it was too small. He had bigger plans, So that was a very, very influential thing. And all the kids, they weren't there long, because all the kids were like, we want to go home, we want to go home. They weren't Mexicans. They were Mexican Americans, And he always says, not that there was anything wrong with that. It was just too different. It was a different life. So they came back to Tucson now.
Wow, we're here with our special guest, Dan Guerrero, here on KPFK.
Very special guest. You always have to say very special.
Very. Travel tips for Aztlan. I'm your host, Mark Torres, joined by Nancy Sanchez.
Yes.
$1 Million Theater.
Oh yeah.
Is that a big venue?
$1 Million Theater. That was something. I was maybe, and I'm guessing because it's a scene in Gaytino, but I'm really little, 5, 6, and absolutely adorable, as you can imagine. and we go to the $1 Million. My mom takes me, and I'm sitting in there, curtain opens, and all of a sudden there's Dad standing there, and I'm like, what the? That was my first experience. Like, wait a minute. I wondered why he didn't go to work during the day like other daddies, And the first time I saw him perform was at the $1 Million, and it was just like, it was. Well, imagine that. You're seeing your father that you see around the house in his boxer shorts and T-shirt, and there he is, and people are looking and they're clapping, and you're like, it was quite an experience. Yeah, the $1 Million was amazing. People would go to the $1 Million Theater, and they spend the entire day. They go with their bag of burritos and their sodas and all that, and because they'd have a movie, they'd have a variedades, they might have a second movie. People would go with their 4 or 5 kids and spend the day at the $1 Million, Yeah, that was a magic place. Never mind that the biggest names from Mexico used to come up, all of them. Lola Beltran, Los Panchos, Agustin Lara, they all went to the $1 Million.
Wow. Now, at this time, is your dad performing with a band behind him?
He doesn't have his own band yet. He would guitar, just him and his guitar. Wow. That's all. Believe me, that's all you needed. I'm going to shift to another era for a second. UCLA, there was this gigantic show, and it was Linda Ronstadt with the, I think the Camperos. It was Poncho Sanchez with his jazz group. It was Tito Puente with a big mambo group. It was huge. And then there was Dad with his guitar. That's all. And who got the only standing ovation of the night, by the way? You know, they pulled out he comes walking, he sits down and he sings for the first time publicly, Barrio Viejo.
Oh, wow.
And I'm in the wings with Linda, and the two of us are crying and crying. And I remember I was kind of crouched down and she was standing, and she was at the top of my head. Oh, we were both crying. It's the first time we'd ever heard the song. You know, he had just written the song. And I forced him to sing it.
Wow.
Because he wrote it for an event in Tucson, and he didn't know what to sing at this event. I said, you should do that beautiful, oh no, that's just for Tucson people. I said, everybody has a barrio, everybody has a hometown. So that was the first time he sang it publicly, was at UCLA Royce Hall, Barrio Viejo.
Now, does he have a regular group, or does he hire the guys to get into the studio when he makes those big band sound swing hits that we all know and love?
Well, it was different. All the big songs he got his own band very early. But for the recording sessions, of course, they put together much larger groups or mariachis, you know. So in the records, it's larger. But he had his Los Cinco Lobos. He had for years, you know, because he used to sing at the Paramount Ballroom for years at the Paramount, which I think is reopened, or did for a while.
It is reopened, and they have all the pictures of all the past performers going back almost 100 years on the wall.
Is he on the wall?
Yes.
I bet. So anyway, he would pack that joint for years and years with his Los Cinco Lobos. And then, so when we moved from Mariana to McDonald Avenue, by that time he had his own band, Los Cinco Lobos. And then he would go, they'd pile into he'd get a brand new Pontiac station wagon every year. And they'd pile the musicians in there, they'd pull a trailer with all the instruments, and twice a year, off they'd go. All up through California, all the way, I mean, through like Montana, Wyoming, you know, through New Mexico, twice a year, spring and fall. And I loved it because he would always bring back presents. It was really cool. Yeah.
All right, we're here with our special guest. We have Dan Guerrero here, and it's KPFK Los Angeles 90.7 FM. Will you tell our audience about his nightclub, Lalo's, and he becomes like the Ricky Ricardo of Boyle Heights in East LA. He has his own place. Is that a defining moment for him?
For all of us. He actually had it twice, and it's too boring to go into the first thing. He went in with a partner because he didn't know anything about nightclubs, and somebody run it, and he became a nightmare, so horrible that my dad left, leaving the name Lalo's and the sign and everything. But of course, without my dad there, it died. Because he had been at the Paramount Ballroom for years, packing that place. And one day he and my mom said, let's open our own club. But then after he had such a hit with Pancho Lopez, with that money, he reopened Lalo's by himself. And my mother basically ran the place, and he sang. Yeah, Lalo's. That was a legendary place. Everybody went to Lalo's. Roybal, everybody. It was the place to go. There was an admission. You couldn't just walk in. Men had to wear suits and ties, women cocktail dresses. Yeah, and it was only open Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday tardeada.
Wow.
And it was next door to Bagues Mortuary. So my dad used to say on the weekends, the dead would rise.
We're at Boyle Heights.
Oh yeah,
We're in Boyle Heights.
Is it on Cesar?
No, East LA.
East LA.
Brooklyn Avenue, East LA, near a Tommy's. I forget what that cross street is. It's still there, and the building is exactly the same. It hasn't changed. It's a Domino's pizza place, but the building configuration is exactly the same. Louis Perez says he used to live nearby, and as soon as his mom would go to sleep, his ruca, I believe he described her, he would get in his bicycle and cut through Lalo's parking lot to go over to Tommy's at that next corner to get their French fries.
Oh, wow.
So everybody has a Lalo story.
Well, that sounds like a really good dynamic. Your dad is the talent and your mom is the bank.
Yep.
So that must have been pretty good.
She did the ordering. She did and neither, by the way, even graduated from high school in those days. In those days, you know, my mom left high school to marry my dad. And my dad, who was 4 years older, he didn't finish high school because he was busy with his music. So no, she ran it. She did all the ordering, the hiring, the firing. She ran that entire place, and Dad would show up and sing.
Amazing.
Okay, what is the actor who played Zorba the Greek?
Anthony Quinn.
Anthony Quinn. I picture like Anthony Quinn showing up at Lalo's. Like
He
that
didn't, unfortunately, where he used to go, because in the 40s, Dad, there's a fabulous photo I love because it's very Ricky Ricardo. He's with his maracas and the ruffled shirt, and there's the palm trees, and it was La Bamba, a nightclub in downtown LA, right near Overa Street. And that's where Ann Sheridan, Montalban, all the big movie stars would go to La Bamba, and Dad used to sing there. Yeah. That's before he had his own band.
Okay, well, we're going to move now to our special guest, Dan Guerrero. We're going to find out a little bit about Dan right now in this next segment.
Yeah, enough of him.
So this is the point where we want to find out about your childhood friend and legendary artist that now has a documentary about him, Carlos Almaraz. Can you talk a little bit about that friendship and how that went from East Los Angeles to New York and back?
That's a whole show by itself. So I'm on Mariana Street, and about 1949, Dad's career starts to pick up after Pecadora, his solo song that kind of put him on the map on Imperial Records. And we moved to McDonald Avenue. Now, we literally had one room apartment. There was a Murphy bed pull out for my mom and dad. I was sleeping in a crib at 4 because there was no room for a bed. And there was a bathroom and a kitchen. That was it. So now we moved to McDonald Avenue. 2 bedrooms,
Whoa.
kitchen, a breakfast nook, front lawn, backyard, huge with fig trees, a children's pool, but dug into the ground. You know, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, but it was like moving to Hearst Castle, you know. I was 9, and my brother Mark, I think my mom was pregnant, you know, so we moved to McDonald. And shortly thereafter, now I'm going to Humphreys Elementary School, and I have this best friend, Ishmael Ramos. And he keeps saying to me, "You've got to meet my friend Charles. You two would," and I was Eddie at the time. That Dan is my middle name. You've got to meet Charles. You two will really get along. And meanwhile, he's saying to Charles, "You've got to meet Eddie. You've got to meet Eddie." Well, one day, poor Ishmael introduces us, and that was the end of Ishmael Ramos. And Carlos and I always used to say, out of nowhere, "I wonder what happened to Ishmael Ramos," because and we loved him, but once Carlos and I met, that was it. That was it. We were about, I don't know, we were in Humphreys, 9 years old, 10 years old, whatever. And that was it. That was it for us. We were friends forever to the day he died.
Okay, so you guys are pals. Did you know he had an inkling for art at this point? Always.
I was already doing school plays and doing shit, you know, in grade school and stuff. But the amazing thing, I know you'll find this hard to believe, I was actually shy. But I still wanted to perform, you know, so I would, but it wasn't my fault. It was my teacher in like kindergarten. There was a radio show called 20 Questions. And you get a silver dollar for each right answer. And in grade school, so I'm in Mariana, so I'm really like 6 or something. They have me in a little suit and tie, and I'm the MC at a PTA meeting, going up and down the aisle there with vanilla wafers as silver dollars, being the host. I have no idea. It's not like I auditioned. I don't know how it happened, but I remember being incredibly nervous, but knowing that I had to do it. So I always had the performing thing, and Carlos was drawing the Disney characters when we were kids. I mean, that's all there ever was for him. That was it. He was going to be an artist, and I was going to be in showbiz. And we were.
All right. So then Dan and Carlos had your bags and you moved to New York. That's quite a transition for a kid growing up in Los Angeles.
East Los Angeles. Let's be
East Los
specific.
Angeles.
You're talking about East Los Angeles, 1962. We never even went downtown.
I was one.
Huh?
I was 1 year old.
I'm so happy for you.
Oh, just so you know, we're in East Los Angeles right now.
Yeah.
We're by ELAC.
ELAC. I graduated from ELAC in 61, and we moved to New York Valentine's Day 62, all because of Breakfast at Tiffany's. We saw that movie, we were like, wow.
Hey,
And
it's a great movie. It's a great
the
movie.
best. So he knew he wanted to be an artist, and I knew I wanted to be in showbiz because in junior high, I went to Kern, now Griffith. Our drama teacher took us to see the movie musical Oklahoma at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood. And I'm like, I guess 12, 13, and I'm like, musicals? I'm in. I'm in. So that was that. So as soon as I graduated from ELAC, and Carlos was he going to Cal State? Did it exist there then? He took a semester off. I graduated from ELAC, and we went to New York, arriving Valentine's Day, 1962. And there's this scene in my play, Gaytino, where we're in the cab, and it's going through Central Park. And it had just been a snowfall. And I can't even tell you. It was like Dorothy going into Oz. You know, it was amazing. And he stayed one semester. He took off one semester, and I stayed 20 years.
Now, what is the difference between Carlos's DNA and yours that made him want to come back right away and you stick around for 20 years?
Well, if I was going to be in musical theater, which I did want to do, I had to be in New York. He was an artist, and he liked LA. I didn't care for LA at all. And he liked LA, and he wanted to be an artist, and he could get that education here. I mean, it not quite like New York, because New York and LA might have, they were probably different countries in the 60s. I mean, really. If they look down on us today, imagine in the 60s, it was like LA was nothing artistically compared to New York. Well, because of the history, it was a much newer city, let's face it. So he never intended to stay. You know, he was just going to go and help me get settled. And if I didn't like it, we'd come back together. And if I liked it, I'd stay. And I stayed 20 years. I moved back to LA in 82.
All right, we're speaking with Dan Guerrero. So you're in New York when the first Chicano play hits Broadway.
Oh, yeah.
Zoot Suit, and your dad's music is there. Like, it's the perfect time to be in New York for this to happen, despite the fact that the critics have no idea what to think of it. What was that experience like, being in the entertainment business, musical theater, and having Zoot Suit arrive on Broadway?
Well, that's what I always call culture clash. And I don't call it that because of Herbert and Rick and Richard. It was culture clash, because up until then, they were completely different worlds for me. In New York, everybody knew I was Mexican-American, but it was nothing. It was nothing. I was living a mainstream life. You know, I was a performer. Sometimes it would get in the way of, it was still the blonde, blue-eyed juvenile, more or less. So they weren't sure what I was. Italian, maybe. They didn't know, but I wasn't blonde, blue-eyed. So that was there. But nonetheless, I performed for years, and then I became a successful Broadway theatrical agent, and then nobody cared. So, so that was my theater life. The only Latino thing was Puerto Ricans on the subway for me. And then I'd come to LA at Christmas, and with Carlos, I was meeting, Barbara Carrasco and John Valadez, and, it was totally Chicano when I'd come out with Carlos, but they were complete separate worlds until Zoot Suit. And there I am, having been to 1 million Broadway opening nights, already, but this one, there were Chicanos. Who ever heard of such a thing? And there I am walking down Broadway with Luis Valdez and Dad and Cesar Chavez. And it was like, talk about culture clash. It was bizarre. I mean, it was bizarre. I can't even say it was like proud, really, because it was more, it was hard to compute. But at the same time, of course, it was thrilling. And there I am at Sardi's with Eddie Olmos, and I didn't know at all. This was Eddie's first thing. I didn't know any of those people at all. They were just, I was meeting them that night. But yeah, it was true culture clash. It was a while later till it's really started to sink in what it was. And because it unfortunately did not play, it did not run, it was just this moment, this kind of moment that came and went, but I remember vividly walking down Broadway and seeing that huge Zoot Suit sign. It was Lupe Alteveros and I guess Eddie and Luis, and that's what started getting me back in touch with my Chicano roots,
Now, if you could go back in time to that opening night, would you wear one of your amazing Zoot Suits to that opening performance?
No, I'm sure I was wearing my chocolate brown velvet jacket with no. My Chicanada came after I moved back to LA. Yeah, because that was 79. And my jumping back into my roots was when I returned. That's when I became super Chicano, best I could. Not that everyone accepted me right away, because I wasn't really a Chicano. I mean, I didn't, I wasn't in Delano. I had never marched. I was never in the Chicano riots. I was just this strange animal, Judith Hernandez, the artist, Judith Hernandez?
Yeah.
She told a funny story. I don't know if we have time, but you can edit it out, but you won't want to. And so I come back on a visit, because I would come home every year for Christmas, of course. And I come home and one of my trips. Okay, now fast forward. I'm talking to Judith Hernandez on the phone, I don't know, a few years ago. And she goes, I'll never forget that time you came to Self-Help Graphics to see Carlos. And I said, well, I had no memory of it whatsoever. This is direct quote. You were wearing a cream-colored silk suit. Safari suits were very popular at that time. She said, Gucci loafers, a Tiffany watch. I mean, she had my outfit down. And then she said, I had never seen a Chicano that looked like you.
Oh my goodness.
I laughed so hard. I really did. And then later I started thinking, well, what does that mean? What does a Chicano look like? But she'd never seen a Chicano that looked like me, in a raw silk suit with a Cartier watch and Gucci loafers. She said, she said it with such, I'd never seen a Chicano that looked like you. My point being that when I moved back, I was different from all the other Chicanos out here. I'd grown up in East LA, but I spent 20 years in New York in a complete mainstream world. I say in my show, I'm one of the rare Chicanos that moved over from the mainstream. It was a very different experience.
Well, that's a good transition point to your Gaytino production. Will you give our audience a thumbnail sketch of how that began and the overall arc of what you were trying to accomplish with this?
Actually, it's a very simple story. I was 65. So I had moved back when I was 40, 41. Luckily, I looked 10 years younger, so I could still kind of pass. Yes. Because let's face it, I had this hugely successful career in New York for years. I move out here, I don't know a soul. I know my parents, I know Carlos, and I'm 40. And all I know is I don't want to be an agent anymore, but I have no idea what I'm going to do. So that's how we start. So I moved back, and I know no one. And actually, my career out here starts because of New York, because I get a call from casting director friends who cast all the big Broadway musicals. What are you doing? I'm unpacking my Barbra Streisand albums. Do you want to cast 9 for Tommy Tune? Do you want to cast Harvey Fierstein?
Oh my gosh.
And I started casting all these big Broadway shows. So I've always tell people that whatever you do serves you well, even when you start again, because I was starting at 40 with nothing. But when I fell into casting, I wasn't casting some little theater up in, Podunk, I was casting at the Amundsen, Lauren Bacall in Woman of the Year, all because of my New York years. And I liked it, but I knew that wasn't it, So I did that for a few years. I started writing for Dramalog, and I always wrote about Latinos. Jimmy Smith just arrived, started LA Law. I did a story on him, and blah, blah. And I got very involved in the Chicano world. I started, volunteering to produce things for, and I wasn't a producer, but I thought, well, I could probably do that, for Carmen Zapata and the Bilingual Foundation of the Arts. And I got into Hamas, that Hispanic organization. So it was very much a plan to connect with my Latino Chicano roots. That was a plan. And eventually that led to a phone call one day, because I was in everything. Yes, this is Goober Peters Television, and we're doing a television show for Paul Rodriguez, and we hear you know everyone who's Latino out there. Yes. Well, we needed this, we needed that. I said, well, we needed that. I said, wait a minute, what about me? I did. I said, fuck this. And she said, well, you're a casting director. We have a talent exec. I said, yeah, but I was an agent in New York. I know how to negotiate contracts. I write for Dramalog. I know how to write. Well, we should meet. I meet, and 3 days later, I'm co-producer of the new El Show de Paul Rodriguez for television. So I'm saying everything you do helps you get to the next step. I never started as a PA. I was co-producing a talk show. And after the first 13, I moved up to producer, and then it went on from there. Yeah.
Well, you showed me a wonderful photo of your dad, Jose Feliciano, and Paul Rodriguez from back in those days. So anybody was passing through that stage.
Let me tell you, the Paul Rodriguez show was it. Now we're talking a bilingual talk show on Univision in 1990.
Wow.
That's right. So we'd have Celia Cruz with a salsa band, Jack Lemmon, and blah, blah, blah. And Paul would say, so Jack, and this and that, and he'd answer, he'd go, and then he would do a quick translate, and then he'd go back to Jack. I mean, every Jean-Claude Van Damme, Joan Rivers, every big U.S. star, because they were interested in the Latino market. And of course, everybody did the Paul Rodriguez show from Mexico, because it was huge. 3 years we were on the road, on the air. It was, I can't even tell you. And because he was really busy doing concerts everywhere, we would only see him once a month on a weekend. And we'd work all month, and we would take 3 shows on a Saturday and 3 shows on a Sunday. And
wow.
And it was a weekly, it was not a daily. So on a weekend, we'd be one show, Celia and a salsa band, and then it'd be David Crosby and his group, and then it'd be Santana, and then it would be on a weekend. And there'd be Jack Lemmon, and there'd be Raquel Welch. It was heaven. 3 years. It was fantastic, yeah. And that started my TV producing career.
Okay, when do you start your Gaytino storyline?
Because all that dried up and I was rotting on the vine at age 65. That's why I wrote Gay. That's the absolute truth. One day I turned 65, and the next day it's like someone pulled the plug on my career. I mean, zero. Television was changing, and the kinds of music concerts, PBS, things that I was doing, the Latino was, it like just stopped. And I thought, well, I'm not dead yet. And I thought, well, maybe I'll go back to my roots. And everybody was doing a solo show. Everybody was doing a solo show. And I thought to myself, I could do one, but here's the thing, and I really mean this, it's not like fake humility, because as you know, I don't believe in humility. I think it's a waste of time. And it took me a long time to learn that, by the way. So I'm looking at my life, and I'm thinking, I wanted people to know who Dad was. He was now really getting well into his 80s, and I wanted people, and Carlos had died, many years prior, and so I didn't want people to forget Carlos. So I decided that I would write a solo show. Everyone was doing solo shows, not just famous people. Everybody. I thought, well, my life has been more interesting. So I never looked at it as my story, honestly. It was a story of growing up gay in East LA in the 50s. It was a story about my dad. It was a story about my best friend. So it is autobiographical, obviously, but it wasn't, in my eyes, it was never about me. It was like what I saw in my two communities. And so I mixed the Latino, the Chicano history with the gay history as I experienced it, being gay in 1950s East LA and Garfield, and being gay in the 60s in New York, baby. Well, that's a whole other show.
Okay. How do you come to terms with the machismo in the Mexican American community and being gay in the 50s?
I didn't. I felt that was their issue, not my issue. You know, I actually had more issue with being Chicano than being gay, because there was something exotic about being gay, and something taboo. And oh, I heard Rock Hudson is gay. There was I can't even describe it. There was something exotic and hushed and naughty, and you know. And being Chicano was just terrible. Chicanos, Mexicans. Oh, that was the two ways that I was feeling, my personal experience of it, you know. And even though that changed when I moved to New York, because in New York, they had never seen a Chicano. There was one Mexican restaurant in all of Manhattan when I moved there. One, down in the Village. That was it. They didn't know what a Chicano was. Mostly they think I was Italian, you know, or if anything. So there was something exotic about being gay. And then once I moved to New York, there was something exotic about being Chicano. There was one store in the Village that sold Mexican ornaments. So my first Christmas tree in New York was all Mexican. And everybody was like, ooh, ooh. Because my friends were from Dublin. They were from Austria. That was the other thing. East LA, there was Asians, Chicanos, Armenians, and white folk. That was it. And in New York, they were, you know, I was working at a bank and everybody around me was from Dublin or from Moscow or it was like moving to Oz. It was so fabulous. New York, oh yeah.
Having Gaytino come out, and then having the situation with the coronavirus pandemic that we're experiencing, and having a lot of the theaters, a lot of the venues closed, how has that affected this experience for you?
Well, mine is certainly a shared experience with everyone, but the interesting thing is that I've been performing Gaytino, you know, since the Kirk Douglas Theater premiere was, I think, in 06, but I only did a couple of performances a year. You know, if somebody would call, hey, this is the Denver Playhouse, could you do Gaytino? Oh yeah, sure, and I go do it, because I was busy producing and I had my whole other life, because when my TV career gave up, I was producing live events. The Kennedy Center, I directed for the LA Opera, you know, so I went into live events, which I loved. So it picked up again after I wrote the show. So I only did a couple shows a year, but the experience was fantastic, mainly because it was so interesting. I was a little more concerned about the Chicanos accepting Gaytino more than the LGBT community. Well, what do you think? Every university I play, and I played many all over the country, I was always brought by Chicano studies. I was never, ever brought by a gay organization.
Wow,
ever.
That's interesting.
Always the Latinos that I was most nervous about, no, they embraced it. I think mainly because of the Chicano history side, and then, oh yeah, it was gay too, but it was Chicano history, and there's so few of us telling our stories out there. There's lots of talented people. I'm not saying I was the only one, but this is also, a lot of years ago, and I'm just talking about my experience. I'm not saying I was the only one doing it. And so it opened the doors, and I was shocked. It was a Latino community that completely and fully embraced it to this day. But then there came a time when I wanted to preserve the stories before I croaked. I mean, I'm going to be 80 in October, and I didn't want those stories lost, you know. And so I thought, oh, I'll do like those old movie stars, and that way we'll screen it, and then I'll sit in a big sofa and answer questions afterwards, and it'll be a lot easier, you know, than having to be on my feet rehearsing 7 hours and then doing the show and then flying back. And it was a lot of work, not the show, but flying cross country, next day rehearsing 7 hours, next morning a run through, performance at night, fly back. For the money I was getting, it was too much work. So that's why I finally filmed it. And I was in the middle of the film festival circuit. I had done 8 film festivals with Gaytino when this thing happened. I had just come back from the Sedona International Film Festival.
How was that?
Oh, well, here's the wonderful thing. Carlos' documentary came out within the same year my Gaytino film. Purely coincidence, because Elsa, his widow, had been trying to do a docu for years. I had wanted to film Gaytino for years, and that we would both do it within the same. So last year, no, year before last, they had screened the Carlos documentary, and I performed Gaytino live the next day with a documentary in Sedona. And then I said, I'm doing a film sometime this year, and then they brought me back the following year with the film. So that was very sweet. That was very sweet. And I had 5 more to go. And 3 days after I came back, the virus hit.
Wow.
Wow. Well, that's a fantastic first conversation to give some.
You know, I'm a series. You know, I'm a series director.
Yes.
Yeah. That was only part 1. It was a 12-part series. But our special guest, Dan Guerrero, thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Travel Tips for Aztlan, KPFK Los Angeles. A really wonderful story for all of us from your dad from Tucson, Arizona, coming to Los Angeles, sharing that experience that a lot of us have with our immigrant abuelos coming up.
Sure.
My parents also came from the Mexican Revolution, and Nancy also from immigrant experience.
Well, I am an immigrant. I came here in 1989.
Wow. From where specifically?
And I was from Toluca, Mexico.
Toluca. Oh.
Yeah, I was born in Toluca. My mom is from Toluca, and my father is from Michoacan.
Oh, wow. So you're like a serious Mexican. You're not
Oh,
like
yeah.
that. You're
No,
not
look
like,
at this. I have my Mexican vacuna.
oh, your vaccination?
My
What do you call it in Spanish?
vaccination.
What do they call
Mi vacuna.
Yeah.
Vacuna,
Oh my
yeah.
God. I had one from Humphreys because in the 40s they were still doing it.
They were doing it, yes.
Yeah.
I think it's 1961. I was the first generation that did not have that.
Wow.
But
Well, Nancy and I win.
yeah, you went too.
We win.
Thank you for sharing your
Thank you
experiences
so much.
with us.
Thank
That was
you.
wonderful. And as Nancy was saying, with our newer generations that really don't know how to connect the threads between our generational history.
It's so important. Yeah, that's why I filmed Gaytino. Not so you could see me, but to hear Dad's story and to hear Carlos' story and what it was like to be a Chicano in the 50s. You know, our storytellers are very, very important because our young people really, you know, nothing pisses me off more than somebody who's in their 20s and will say something, go, oh, I wasn't around then. Like, oh, does that make you wonderful or what? I mean, that pisses me off. We all need to know our history and on whose shoulders we stand. I'm sorry. I believe in that firmly, and leave that in.
All
Yes.
right.
I want to say one more thing.
Sure.
When I migrated here and I was learning how to speak English, I would hear las ardillitas.
Oh, of course.
And now as an adult, I'm like, what? Everything's coming together. Like
Yes,
your
it's
dad's
spooky, isn't it?
music with las ardillitas. I didn't know that was him, but I grew up listening.
Of course.
him.
They, you know, the Ardillitas were not just Mexico. They were all Central America.
Mm-hmm.
I have my charro jacket, and I had a vintage sarape from the 40s, gorgeous, in colors I've never seen, grays, and, you know, and I took it to have them make me a jacket to the guy right there across from Mariachi Plaza.
Yeah.
Casa del Mariachi.
Yeah. He's like, the Ardillitas. He's from Honduras. And so I call him Demetrio. I call him Demetrio. Yeah, he's from Honduras, and he said he grew up with the Arvitas. Everybody did.
Yes.
I'm sure they paid for my trip to New York.
Wow, that's awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dan
Okay,
Guerrero.
thank you.
We
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed, and thank you for sharing a little segment of Carlos Almaraz's painting in back of you over there.
Oh, yeah. A good one. He was very generous. Birthdays, Christmas, whatever. Artwork. I only have one piece that I remember buying, that incredible pastel up there. Otherwise, that's I think he was wanting to take care of me in my old age. I'm there, so I might have to start selling some things.
Dan, thank you so much. And we're going
Thank
to
you.
give you our greeting, which now is respect.
Oh, and the same to you. It's important our young people preserve these stories. So I bow to you.